No F-35 disturbing the peace every day. And what is it for but igniting a war that'll blow all our hinders away?
We don't do this work alone. We have friends. We have friends in Burlington, Vermont, who have been helping us along the way. And we had Colonel Roseanne Greco come out and share with us what they learned and what they are learning in Burlington, Vermont. And she helped us get to our guest of honor, Pierre Sprey, who has spent most of his adult life looking at military systems. And he was one of the co-designers, developers of the F-16 plane, of the A-10 plane. And he is a staunch critic of the F-35. So we have a really unique perspective here. This is an insider, a person who's been inside the military-industrial complex, who is going to talk to us tonight about his concerns. And I don't want to frighten anybody, but at the same time, we should be frightened. Fear can be a great motivator and keep us going together. But know that I think we should find great strength in the fact that we're not in this alone, that we are together, and that we were here to support each other in the struggle to do what's right for our community and for the people who live in our community. So Pierre has made a trek here to share with us his thoughts. He's also an incredible artist himself. He has a extensive background in music, and that is one of his passions. So it's just a real thrill, and I'm so grateful that Pierre was willing to travel so far to come and help us and share his knowledge, and to join us in this struggle against these planes that are so ill-suited to our community. So Pierre, if you could come up.
I appreciate that handsome introduction. Let me start by quoting Mark Twain from about a century ago, because he said something that's very germane to what we're all up against here. He said, "In this country, there are two things that are so disgusting that no American should be forced to witness them. One is the making of sausage, and the other is the making of legislation." And among probably among the most disgusting parts of the making of that legislation that I've personally witnessed up close and personal is the making of the defense budget. And I raise that because everything that's wrong with the F-35 for Madison is the result of that terrible, disgusting process by which we put together our defense budgets. So what's wrong with the F-35 for Madison? And I'm going to be very brief about fairly complicated subjects, and I hope leave lots of time for you to ask questions about the part you're interested in, because the ramifications of this can be endless. What's wrong with the F-35 for Madison? Encapsulated, it's an unconscionable amount of noise for a dense urban area. The F-16 is already too noisy for Madison, much as I'm committed to the F-16, having worked on it. Using the afterburner on the F-16 should never happen in a community as densely populated and as close to the airport. The F-35, despite everything you've heard from its defenders, is substantially more noisy, substantially worse, more harmful to people's health, to children's development, people's sleep, and so on. It's really loud, as you heard from Chris. And the numbers that are put out by the Air Force in the environmental impact statement and so on should be largely ignored. They're mostly concocted. What else is wrong with the F-35 besides the really obvious noise problem? The second thing is a safety problem that you may not know about. Let me start by saying that 2/3 of all airplane crashes are within 5 miles of the runway, because takeoff and landings are more dangerous than any other part of the flight. When an aluminum airplane crashes in a city, and we've had that happen, it's bad because the fuel burns. The aluminum doesn't burn, the fuel burns, and you burn down a few houses. We just had an incident a few years ago in Norfolk like that. Fortunately, nobody got hurt, but several houses got burned down. When an F-35 crashes, it's not an aluminum airplane. It's in the trade we call it a plastic airplane. It's composite materials, which are fibers, carbon fibers, and a very advanced form of epoxy. And the plane structure burns in addition to the fuel. And when that plastic burns, it's incredibly toxic. It is corrosive to lungs, it lets out all kinds of carcinogens and so on. When you add to that the stealth, remember this is not just a plastic airplane like some of the newest airliners, this is also a stealthy airplane. The stealth makes it an order of magnitude worse. I cannot tell you the number of cases of people poisoned by stealth chemicals, even when they haven't been burned, like production workers have had terrific problems from breathing the fumes of stealth coatings. And when it burns, of course, the results are far worse. If you think about it, the crash of an F-35, I mean, it's fairly unlikely, but the crash of an F-35 in a densely populated urban area like Madison would be a disaster way beyond a terrorist chemical attack. If you think of a couple of ISIS terrorists coming here with a cylinder of chlorine and letting it loose somewhere off in a densely packed suburb of Madison, that would be trivial compared to what a burning F-35 can do. It can cover blocks and blocks and blocks. Thousands of people can be exposed to very, very damaging, lung-corroding, heavily carcinogenic fumes that people don't even know how to put out. That's the other part. If such a disaster happened, your local fire departments would have no idea what to do. All this is too new. Fire people don't know what's necessary. First of all, they don't even know what's necessary to put out an ordinary plastic airplane fire, much less a stealth fire, much less how to deal with the victims. This would be a real, real catastrophe. Then in one sense, maybe even more dangerous than this possible crash scenario that I've just sketched for you, and of even way larger consequence, is the nuclear role of the F-35. The Air Force and the National Guard have told you that the F-35 can't carry a nuclear weapon, the F-35s that are coming to Madison. And the Secretary of the Air Force, I think, has told you that it has no nuclear mission. Those statements are meaningless. The Air Force has a commitment to make every single seat fighter they've ever had since the early 50s, to make it nuclear capable. And the reason they're telling you that, oh, your F-35s won't carry nuclear weapons is because of the horrible mismanagement of the whole F-35 program. 14 years after it started, They're still busy designing this airplane and testing it and changing it. And no F-35, neither the ones in Madison nor the ones the Air Force owns, has any nuclear capability now because they haven't finished designing and testing it. They're right in the midst of it. It'll be finished fairly soon. I guarantee you, when they're finished with that, within 10 years, the Madison F-35s will have nuclear wiring. Because this is something, again, driven by money, driven by that horrible budget process that Mark Twain kind of presaged. The Air Force will move heaven and earth to put nuclear weaponry on the F-35. Now, why is that of consequence to Madison? This is a little complex. I'll go through it very quickly, and if anybody wants to know more, I'll answer questions. There won't be nuclear weapons stored here. That's not the issue at all. The issue is that if you have an F-35 squadron here, it can be activated at any time by the president. And since we now have this tradition that every time there's a little trouble in the world, we deploy bombing airplanes to the trouble spot, at least in order to threaten people, if not to actually bomb them. So your F-35s could easily be deployed in a crisis. Now think of the crisis we're talking about. We're thinking about, say, on the Russian border. There are countries that have big Russian populations like Lithuania and Ukraine. And you get some neo-Nazi nutcases who decide they want to slaughter some native Russians in Lithuania or in Ukraine. The Russians would clearly move to threaten them. Putin has already said he'll do it, and that would have every reason to do so. They move up divisions close to the border. We have single-seat F-35s that we've just deployed because some, imagine, possibly unstable president might deploy them to show his macho qualities. And they're sitting there on nuclear alert in an airstrip in eastern Poland within range of Russia. And they've got fighter pilots sitting out all night with a nuclear weapon tucked up in the belly of the airplane on nuclear alert. And it's like a frighteningly unstable situation. What if that pilot is hung over? What if he has a sudden mental breakdown? What if he's, himself a neo-Nazi? This is the single most dangerous, destabilizing aspect of nuclear weaponry there is the single-seat fighter with the single pilot in control. There's no other place in nuclear weaponry where you don't have a crew to stop something from happening if somebody goes rogue. Think about that. Now, how does that impact Madison? Of course, obviously you wouldn't want to be the source of a squadron that had a rogue pilot in it that started the nuclear holocaust. But the consequences for Madison are perhaps even more direct. Because we've unleashed a whole new nuclear buildup, and I'm sorry to say it was Obama who started it in 2010, about $1 trillion of extra spending that he spent pretty much as a bribe to the military-industrial complex so they would let him get on with the arms limitation treaty that he was particularly keen to negotiate. It's a horrible mistake for the world when he unleashed that $1 trillion program. And of course, Trump has made it bigger and worse. But it was Obama who opened the door for it. And the worst thing he opened the door for was the idea of small, precise nuclear weapons. Now, why are small, precise nuclear weapons dangerous? Because they have revived an old and totally discredited concept that you can have little controlled regional nuclear wars. You just drop a nuke precisely here and make sure it's not too big. You drop one there, and the enemy is all impressed and he gives up. This is the concept of now called flexible response. That's even worse than the reigning concept of the nuclear holocaust balanced by terror on both sides. Because again, this is inviting some future unstable president to make a little demonstration with a little small nuke. And the small nukes were unleashed by Obama in 2010, and specifically, the first one that will come online is the one that was designed for the F-35, something called the B-61-12, which has a whole sorry history of itself. It's the latest in a long family of nuclear weapons that were supposed to be carried under the wings of fighters. And this one was unleashed under even more false pretenses. It's about to come to fruition. It's designed for the F-35. And to make all this much worse, this is where Trump's contribution comes in. Trump commissioned a new nuclear policy review in 2018. Those are very important documents that are put out every 4 years. In truth, they're documents to justify spending more on nuclear weapons, but they're taken by the world as a statement of American strategy with nuclear weapons. And this one states for the first time ever, it mentions a fighter as part of America's strategic forces. And it mentions the F-35 8 times by name. That's never been done in any previous nuclear posture review. You can imagine how seriously the Russians and the Chinese nuclear strategists take this. I'm sure they read it more carefully than we do. What's the consequence of that for Madison? Very simple. Once that strategic posture review says the F-35 is an integral part of America's strategic nuclear deterrent, that makes Madison a target. So having F-35s here will transform Madison from just any old National Guard base into a guard base that carries a nuclear platform that the Russians and the Chinese view as a threat, and that means you wind up on a target list. So just to wrap it up, you've doing this really, really unsuitable basing of this noisy, potentially disastrously toxic airplane that could unleash the nuclear holocaust and will certainly make Madison a target. We're doing all this for an airplane that is one of the most mismanaged, stretched out, overrun, delayed, and flawed, deeply flawed weapons that we've ever developed, and happens to be the most expensive weapon we've ever developed of any kind. So when people attack you for opposing the F-35 here, as they attack me, of course, as unpatriotic, I think it's very easy to answer, no, the real patriotism is to oppose an airplane that is this disastrously ineffective, dangerous, and unsuitable. That's true patriotism.